The archive chamber was cold and silent. Dust particles floated through beams of blue light that illuminated rows upon rows of data crystals. Each crystal contained memories, histories, and secrets from across the galaxy. Some held stories of triumph and glory. Others held warnings that should never be forgotten. Kriath stood before a particular section marked with red warning symbols. His four eyes blinked in sequence as he read the label. It said, "Restricted access. Council authorization required. The Devourer incident." His slender fingers trembled slightly as he inserted his research credentials into the access panel. He was young for an Arxian scholar, barely 300 cycles old. His professors said he asked too many questions. His family worried he was too curious about dangerous subjects. But Kriath needed to know the truth about the event that changed the galaxy forever. The event that everyone whispered about but no one wanted to discuss openly. The panel blinked green. Access granted. Kriath's heart raced as he extracted the data crystal and moved to a private viewing chamber. He locked the door behind him and inserted the crystal into the reader. Holographic displays flickered to life around him, surrounding him with images and text from 200 years ago. The first files showed a very different galaxy than the one Kriath knew. Back then, the Council of Sentient Worlds was confident and strong. Over 10,000 species worked together in harmony. Trade routes connected millions of worlds. Wars were rare and quickly stopped by Council peacekeepers. It was a golden age of cooperation and prosperity. And then there were the humans. Kriath leaned forward, studying the early reports about humanity. They had joined the galactic community 150 years before the incident. The files described them as unusual creatures. They came from a death world called Earth, where nearly everything was trying to kill them. Extreme temperatures, dangerous predators, deadly diseases, and natural disasters that could destroy entire regions. Yet somehow, these humans had survived. More than survived. They had thrived and eventually reached the stars. The initial contact reports were fascinating. The first council ships that visited Earth expected to find primitive warriors, aggressive and violent like most Death World species. Instead, they found something unexpected. Yes, humans had weapons and armies. Yes, their history was filled with terrible wars. But they also had art, music, literature, and philosophy. They formed bonds with other species easily. They rescued animals and cared for creatures that served no practical purpose. One xenopsychologist's report caught Kriath's attention. It read, "Humans appear to be a contradiction. They are pack-bonding predators with remarkable capacity for both extreme violence and extreme compassion. They seem to actively choose cooperation over conflict whenever possible. Recommend full diplomatic relations." And so humanity joined the galactic community. The files showed their integration over the next century and a half. Humans became traders, explorers, scientists, artists, and diplomats. They settled dozens of colony worlds. Their population in space grew to over 15 billion across their territories. Humans became famous for certain traits. They were persistent to the point of stubbornness. If a problem seemed unsolvable, humans would keep trying different approaches until something worked. They were creative, often finding solutions that other species never considered, and they were excellent mediators. When two species had conflicts, they often asked for human diplomats to help negotiate peace. Kriath read report after report of humans stopping conflicts through patient discussion and creative compromise. In 150 years of galactic presence, humanity had never started a single war. They had fought in self-defense a few times, but they always stopped as soon as the threat ended. They always offered peace terms. They always tried to find the diplomatic solution. The galaxy grew comfortable with humanity. Other species stopped seeing them as death-worlders and simply saw them as reliable friends and partners. Human restaurants became popular on cosmopolitan worlds. Human music found fans across hundreds of species. Human literature was translated into thousands of languages. Then Kriath reached the files about the Cathrel, the species that everyone now called the Devourers, though that was not their original name. The Cathrel were also relative newcomers to the galactic stage, having joined only 50 years before the incident. They were large, insectoid creatures with hard exoskeletons and powerful mandibles. They came from a harsh world where resources were scarce and competition was brutal. Their culture valued strength above all else. The strong ruled and the weak served or died. The council had debated whether to accept the Cathrel as members. Some species argued they were too aggressive, too violent, But others pointed out that many species had warrior cultures and managed to follow council rules. The Cathrel promised to respect galactic law. They signed the treaties. They were granted membership. For decades, the Cathrel stayed mostly in their own territory. They traded little and kept to themselves. The council was satisfied. The Cathrel seemed content to develop their worlds without causing problems for others. But the files showed that the Cathrel military was growing. Their shipyards were busy. Their army was training constantly. Council observers reported this, but no action was taken. The Cathrel had the right to defend themselves. As long as they did not attack others, the council would not interfere. Kriath noticed something interesting in the files. Human intelligence agencies had been watching the Cathrel carefully. Human analysts produced detailed reports about Cathrel military capabilities, cultural values, and potential threats. One report concluded, the Cathrel view compromise as weakness. They respect only strength. Recommend maintaining defensive readiness near Cathrel space. But the galaxy was at peace. Trade was good. No one wanted to believe that a council member species would break the treaties. The humans maintained their defensive fleets, but they did not alarm others with warnings. They simply watched and waited. Kriath paused the playback and sat back in his chair. His hands were shaking. He knew what was coming next in the files. Everyone in the galaxy knew the basic story. The Cathrel had attacked human colonies. Humanity had responded. When it was over, the Cathrel no longer existed, but the details were classified. The truth was locked away. Until now, Kriath had only heard rumors and whispers. Now he would finally learn what really happened. He would learn why humanity, the species known for patience and diplomacy, had done the unthinkable. He would learn why the peaceful mediators became the only species in galactic history to completely eradicate another intelligent species from existence. Kriath took a deep breath and continued reading. The next files were marked with the highest security classification. The header read, The Breaking Point, How the Devourers Awoke the Sleeping Monster. His four eyes widened as he began to read about the raids, the attacks, and the atrocities that followed. He read about human restraint tested again and again. He read about warnings ignored and mercy mistaken for fear. And he read about the moment when humanity's infinite patience finally ran out. The young scholar realized he was about to learn a terrible truth. Sometimes the kindest species could become the most terrifying. Sometimes the friends who loved you most were capable of the greatest destruction. And sometimes, in the cold mathematics of survival, entire species could be erased from the universe as if they had never existed at all. The first Cathrel raid happened on a small human mining colony called Providence Point. It was home to 12,000 people who extracted rare minerals from asteroid fields. The settlement had minimal defenses because it was deep inside council-protected space. No one expected an attack there. The Cathrel ships arrived without warning. They destroyed the defensive satellites in minutes. Then they landed soldiers on the colony stations. What happened next was recorded by security cameras and later presented to the council as evidence. The Cathrel did not simply take what they wanted and leave. They hunted the colonists through the corridors. They killed slowly and deliberately. They seemed to enjoy the fear they created. When human defense forces arrived 6 hours later, they found bodies everywhere. The Cathrel had already left, taking prisoners with them. The human government filed an official protest with the council. They demanded action against the Cathrel. They showed the security footage to council representatives. Many species were shocked and disgusted. The council summoned Cathrel ambassadors to explain their actions. The Cathrel claimed it was an unauthorized action by a rogue military commander. They apologized. They offered to pay compensation. They promised it would not happen again. The council debated for weeks about what to do. Some wanted strong sanctions. Others argued for giving the Cathrel a chance to reform. In the end, the council issued a formal warning and demanded the Cathrel pay reparations to the victims' families. The humans accepted this decision. They did not want war. They believed in the council system. They strengthened their border defenses and waited to see if the Cathrel would honor their promise. 3 months later, the Cathrel raided another human colony. This time it was an agricultural world called New Hope, home to 40,000 farmers and their families. Again, the attack was brutal. Again, the Cathrel took prisoners. Again, they left destruction and death behind. The human ambassador to the council was a woman named Sarah Chen. She stood before the assembled representatives of 10,000 species and spoke with controlled anger. Her voice was steady, but everyone could hear the fury beneath it. She said the Cathrel were testing humanity. They were seeing how much humans would tolerate. She said the Council's weak response to the first attack had encouraged a second attack. She demanded immediate military action against the Cathrel. She said if the Council would not protect human civilians, humanity would have to do it themselves. The Council debated again. Some species agreed with Ambassador Chen. Others worried that military action would start a larger war. The Cathrel ambassadors claimed again that rogue elements were responsible. They offered more apologies and more compensation. They suggested joint patrols to prevent future incidents. The Council voted for economic sanctions against the Cathrel. Trade restrictions were imposed. Cathrel ships were banned from certain routes, but no military action was authorized. The Council still believed that diplomacy could solve the problem. Ambassador Chen left the chamber without speaking to anyone. Human ships began evacuating civilians from vulnerable colonies. Human military fleets moved to defensive positions, but humanity did not attack. They still followed Council rules. They still believed in the system. The Cathrel saw this as more weakness. Their propaganda broadcast to their own people called humans soft prey animals, who hid behind Council protection. Cathrel military leaders began planning larger operations. They believed they could take whatever they wanted from human space, and the humans would always back down. 6 months after the first raid, the Cathrel launched their largest attack. A full battle fleet entered human space and headed for New Ethiopia, one of humanity's most populated colony worlds. 3 billion people lived there, growing food that fed dozens of human settlements. It was considered safe, far from any potential threats. The Cathrel fleet ignored all communication attempts. Human defense forces moved to intercept, but they were outnumbered. The Cathrel had brought enough firepower to overwhelm the local defenses. They had planned this carefully. The Battle of New Ethiopia lasted 18 hours. Human ships fought desperately to protect the planet. They called for reinforcements, but the nearest human fleets were days away. The Council peacekeeping forces were even farther. The colonists on the planet watched the battle in the sky and prayed their defenders would hold. They did not hold. The Cathrel broke through the defensive line. Their ships moved into orbit over New Ethiopia. Then they began firing on the surface. The Cathrel used what military analysts called glassing weapons. These were designed to superheat a planet's surface until it turned to molten glass. They were banned by Council law. No one had used them in warfare for thousands of years. They were considered too horrible, too final. The Cathrel used them anyway. The weapons fired continuously for 6 hours. The temperature on New Ethiopia's surface rose to thousands of degrees. The oceans boiled. The atmosphere burned. Every city, every farm, every settlement melted and fused into cooling glass. 3.2 billion people died. Not quickly. The heat killed most, but many died from suffocation as the atmosphere ignited. Some survived in deep shelters for hours or even days before their life support failed. Emergency broadcasts from the surface were received by human ships too far away to help. People said goodbye to loved ones across the galaxy. Parents recorded final messages for children who were off-world. Children cried for mothers and fathers who would never answer. When the Cathrel fleet left, New Ethiopia was a dead world. The entire surface glowed red with residual heat. Nothing lived there anymore. Nothing could live there for centuries to come. The Council held an emergency session. Representatives from every species gathered to condemn the Cathrel action. Even species that had defended the Cathrel before were horrified. This was not a raid. This was not even a war crime. This was genocide on a planetary scale. The Council voted for immediate military intervention. A peacekeeping fleet would be assembled to punish the Cathrel and prevent further attacks. But assembling such a fleet would take time. Ships had to be gathered from hundreds of species. Command structures had to be established. Logistics had to be arranged. The Council estimated it would take at least 2 months to mount an effective military response. Ambassador Sarah Chen stood before the Council one final time. She had lost her own sister and 2 nephews on New Ethiopia. She had listened to their final messages. She had heard her nephew, only 6 years old, asking why no one was coming to save them. Her speech was short. She spoke with a calmness that was somehow more terrifying than rage. She thanked the Council for their condemnation of the Cathrel action. She thanked them for their decision to finally use military force. Then she said humanity would no longer require council assistance. She said humanity was withdrawing from the Council of Sentient Worlds. Not permanently, she clarified, but temporarily. She said humans needed time to process their grief. She said they needed to handle their own security since the Council had proven unable to protect human civilians. Some Council members protested. They said humanity should not act alone. They said coordinated action was necessary. They urged patience and careful planning. Ambassador Chen smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. She said humanity had been patient for over a year. She said humanity had trusted the Council system, while the Cathrel raided human colonies again and again. She said humanity had believed in diplomacy, while 3 billion of their people burned alive. Then she delivered the line that would be remembered forever across the galaxy. She said, "We tried your way. Now witness ours. We will solve the Cathrel problem permanently. We will make sure no species ever has to fear them again. And we will do it with or without Council approval." She left the chamber. Every human diplomat and representative left with her. Human trade ships began returning to human space. Human citizens started evacuating from alien worlds. Human military vessels disappeared from joint patrol routes. The galaxy watched in confusion. What were the humans planning? Would they invade Cathrel space? Would they demand territory as compensation? Would they seek some kind of negotiated justice? 47 days passed in complete silence. Human space became closed to outsiders. All communication from human worlds stopped. Their ships vanished from the trade lanes. It was as if humanity had simply withdrawn from the galaxy entirely. The Council continued debating. The Cathrel claimed their attack on New Ethiopia was justified retaliation for human aggression. Few believed this, but military action against them was still being planned slowly and carefully. Council ships began moving toward Cathrel space, but they moved slowly, giving diplomacy every chance to work. On the 48th day, humanity emerged from their silence. And the galaxy learned what happens when you make the peaceful species truly angry. The human fleets emerged from their space on the 48th day. Council observers who saw them were shocked by what they witnessed. These were not the same human ships they had seen before. Everything had changed. During those 47 days of silence, every human world had transformed into a war factory. Every civilian industry had converted to military production. Every shipyard was building warships. Every factory was producing weapons. Every person was contributing to the war effort in some way. It was a level of coordination and commitment that terrified the species watching from outside. Humans had done this before in their own history. They called it total war. It meant that an entire civilization focused every resource, every moment of time, every ounce of energy on winning a conflict. Other species had wars. Humans had wars that consumed their entire society. But what emerged from human space was not just more warships. The vessels that appeared were unlike anything the Council had seen from humanity before. These were not defensive ships meant to protect colonies. These were not patrol vessels meant to keep trade routes safe. These were extinction vessels. The ships were massive, dark, and covered in weapons that served only one purpose: complete destruction. There were atmospheric incinerators that could burn away a planet's air. There were tectonic destabilizers that could shatter a world's crust. There were stellar modification devices that could weaponize a sun itself. The humans had built tools designed not to win battles but to erase every trace of an enemy. Admiral Sarah Chen, who had lost her family on New Ethiopia, commanded the fleet. She broadcast a single message to the Cathrel and to the Council. The message was simple: for New Ethiopia, for Providence Point, for New Hope, for every human who died begging for mercy that never came. We are coming, and we will not stop until the Cathrel are nothing but a memory. The Cathrel military mobilized to defend their territory. They had a powerful fleet. They had strong defenses on their worlds. They had fought and won many battles against other species in their region before joining the Council. They were confident they could defeat the humans. They were wrong. The human fleet did not engage in normal warfare. They did not try to capture territory. They did not aim for military targets specifically. They simply moved from one Cathrel world to the next and sterilized each planet completely. The first world to die was a Cathrel military outpost called Shard. 500 million Cathrel lived there. supporting a major fleet base. The Cathrel fleet moved to defend it. Human ships engaged them briefly, using new weapons the Cathrel had never seen. The human vessels fired swarms of small, smart missiles that overwhelmed Cathrel defenses. They used energy weapons that cut through Cathrel shields like they were not there. They used electronic warfare that shut down Cathrel systems before a shot was even fired. The Cathrel fleet was destroyed in 40 minutes. Then the human ships moved into orbit and began their real work. They deployed atmospheric incinerators that fell through Shard's air, releasing heat and chemicals that turned the entire atmosphere into a burning hell. Every living thing on the surface died within hours. The oceans evaporated. The land became scorched rock. When the humans left, Shard was as dead as New Ethiopia. 500 million Cathrel had been erased. The Cathrel government sent desperate messages to the council. They begged for intervention. They offered to surrender. They promised to face justice for their crimes. They pleaded for the council to stop the humans before more Cathrel died. The council tried. Council ships moved to intercept the human fleet. Council diplomats contacted Admiral Chen, demanding she cease military operations. They said the Cathrel had agreed to surrender. They said the council would handle punishment for the New Ethiopia attack. They begged the humans to show mercy. Admiral Chen's response was broadcast across the galaxy. She said mercy was what humanity had shown for a year while the Cathrel raided their colonies. She said mercy was what humans had asked the council to deliver while the council debated and delayed. She said mercy died with 3 billion people on New Ethiopia. She said the humans would not stop until every Cathrel world was silent. Council ships tried to physically block the human fleet. 3 council peacekeeping vessels positioned themselves between the human fleet and the next Cathrel world. They broadcast that they would not move. They demanded the humans respect council authority. The human fleet simply went around them. When the council ships tried to follow and interfere, human vessels disabled them with electromagnetic pulses that shut down their systems without destroying them. The humans did not want to kill council peacekeepers. They just wanted them out of the way. The next Cathrel world died. Then the next. Then the next. The Cathrel tried everything to stop the humans. They sent their entire military fleet to defend their homeworld. The humans destroyed the fleet. They tried to evacuate civilians to hidden colonies. Human intelligence found every hidden location. They tried to scatter their population across the galaxy as refugees. Human ships hunted down every transport. The galaxy watched in horror as world after world went silent. The humans were methodical and thorough. They kept detailed records of every Cathrel settlement, every colony, every outpost. They checked each location off their list as it was sterilized. They made sure nothing was missed. Some council species tried to help the Cathrel by hiding survivors. They smuggled Cathrel refugees to secret locations. They thought they were doing the right thing, saving innocent lives from human vengeance. The humans found out. They did not attack the species who had hidden Cathrel survivors. Instead, they simply surrounded those species' home systems with warships and waited. Human representatives delivered a simple message. Return the Cathrel you are hiding or face economic blockade until you do. We will wait as long as necessary. The blockades lasted weeks in some cases. The species who had hidden Cathrel survivors watched their trade stop. Their economies suffer. Their people grow angry at the disruption. Eventually, every species surrendered the Cathrel they had hidden. They had no choice. Humanity was willing to wait forever. The surrendered Cathrel were not tortured. They were not abused. They were simply transported to designated locations and held until human forces arrived to deal with them. The humans were not cruel. They were not sadistic. They were just thorough. Every Cathrel had to be accounted for. 6 months after the human fleet first emerged, the Cathrel homeworld was the last major population center remaining. 15 billion Cathrel lived there, including their government leaders, their cultural treasures, and their hope for survival. The Cathrel military had been shattered. They had no more ships, no more weapons, no more hope of victory. The Cathrel government broadcast a final surrender. They offered everything they had. They would disband their military permanently. They would accept any punishment the council demanded. They would live under human supervision for generations if necessary. They would do anything if humanity would just let their species survive. Admiral Chen's response was played across every communication channel in the galaxy. She stood on the bridge of her flagship, surrounded by officers who had all lost family on New Ethiopia or other attacked colonies. She looked directly into the camera and spoke. She said that humanity had learned a terrible lesson. She said that mercy was a gift that required the recipient to value life. She said the Cathrel had proven again and again that they did not value human life. She said that humanity had trusted council justice and watched 3 billion of their people die, while that justice moved slowly. She said that humanity would not risk their children on the hope that the Cathrel might change. Then she gave the order that would haunt humanity forever. She said, "Begin extinction protocol. Leave no survivors." The council representatives watching the broadcast begged her to reconsider. Thousands of species sent messages pleading for the Cathrel homeworld to be spared. They said children lived there. They said innocents who had opposed their government's aggression were trapped there. They said that destroying the homeworld would make humanity no better than the Cathrel. Admiral Chen heard all these pleas. She considered them. Then she thought about her 6-year-old nephew asking why no one was coming to save him. She thought about 3 billion voices crying for help that never arrived. She thought about a year of patience and restraint that had earned humanity nothing but more attacks. She confirmed the order. The human fleet moved into position around the Cathrel homeworld. They deployed a weapon that had been specifically designed for this moment. It was called a stellar cage. Massive generators surrounded the Cathrel sun and began drawing energy from it. That energy was concentrated and aimed at the planets orbiting the star. The Cathrel homeworld did not burn quickly like New Ethiopia had. Instead, it was hit with concentrated stellar energy again and again over the course of days. The surface was scoured clean. The oceans evaporated. The crust melted down to the mantle. By the time the humans were finished, the homeworld was nothing but a ball of cooling magma, lifeless and barren. 15 billion Cathrel died. The last major population of their species was gone. Only scattered survivors remained, hidden in research stations and remote outposts. And humanity was coming for them too. The hunt for the remaining Cathrel took another 3 months. Human intelligence had been thorough. They had tracked every Cathrel ship that left their territory. They had monitored every communication. They had mapped every possible location where survivors might be hiding. Now they moved through space with cold efficiency, checking each location one by one. The council tried to negotiate a ceasefire. Representatives from hundreds of species offered to mediate. They proposed trials for Cathrel leadership. They suggested prison worlds where remaining Cathrel could be isolated forever. They offered every possible compromise that would let the Cathrel species continue to exist. Humanity refused every offer. Admiral Chen made humanity's position clear in a broadcast to the entire galaxy. She said that humanity had tried trusting others to handle the Cathrel problem. That trust had cost 3 billion lives. She said humanity would not make that mistake again. She said the only guarantee that the Cathrel would never hurt anyone again was if the Cathrel no longer existed. Many species were horrified by this logic. Some called it genocide. Some called it evil. Some said humanity had become monsters worse than the Cathrel themselves. But other species quietly agreed with the humans. They had watched the Cathrel raids. They had seen the brutality. They had witnessed 3 billion people die while the council debated. They understood why humanity felt they could not take any risks. The human ships continued their work. They found a Cathrel colony on a remote moon. 2 million Cathrel lived there, mining ice for water. The colony had no military. Most of the workers were young adults just starting their careers. They sent messages saying they had opposed their government's wars. They had protested the attacks on humans. They begged to be spared. Human ships surrounded the moon. They offered the Cathrel workers a chance to record final messages to anyone they wished. The humans would make sure those messages were delivered. Then the moon was sterilized. 2 million more Cathrel ceased to exist. This pattern repeated again and again. Human forces found Cathrel survivors, gave them time to make peace with their fate, then eliminated them. The humans were not cruel about it. Deaths were quick. There was no torture, no humiliation. The humans simply erased each Cathrel group they found and moved to the next location. A group of Cathrel scientists was discovered on a deep space research station. They were studying exotic physics, trying to develop new technologies. Their work had nothing to do with military applications. 3,000 Cathrel lived on the station, including many who had spent their entire lives there. They had families. They had children who had been born on the station and had never seen a Cathrel world. The lead scientist sent a message to the approaching human fleet. Her name was Sikthera, and she had been one of the Cathrel who argued against joining the council in the first place. She had predicted that Cathrel aggression would lead to disaster. She had been ignored by her government. Now she watched human warships approach and knew her predictions had come true in the worst possible way. She did not beg for mercy. Instead, she asked for understanding. She said that not all Cathrel were responsible for what their military had done. She said children on this station had never hurt anyone. She said that destroying them would not bring back the humans who died on New Ethiopia. She asked if humanity really wanted to become a species that killed children to ensure their own safety. The human commander who received this message was named James Rodriguez. He had lost his husband and their adopted daughter on New Ethiopia. He had listened to their final messages over and over. He had heard his daughter, just 8 years old, asking him to come save them. He had arrived in orbit above New Ethiopia to find nothing but a cooling ball of glass where his family had been. Commander Rodriguez sent a reply to Sikthara. He said he understood her argument. He said she was right that not all Cathrel were responsible. He said she was right that Cathrel children were innocent. He said she was right that killing them would not bring back any humans. Then he said that humanity had learned a terrible lesson about the cost of mercy. He said that humans had shown mercy to the Cathrel for over a year. They had trusted council justice. They had believed in rehabilitation and second chances. And while humans were being merciful, the Cathrel had raided their colonies again and again. While humans trusted the council, 3 billion of their people had burned alive. While humans believed in giving species a chance to change, Cathrel children were being taught that humans were weak prey animals. Commander Rodriguez said humanity would not make that mistake again. He said that maybe some Cathrel would have grown up to be peaceful. Maybe some would have opposed violence. Maybe some would have been humanity's friends. But humanity could not take that risk. They could not bet their children's lives on the possibility that Cathrel nature might change over generations. He said, "Every Cathrel child who grows up is a Cathrel adult who might one day attack human worlds. Every Cathrel scientist might develop weapons to use against us. Every Cathrel who survives is a potential threat to human families. We will not take that risk. We are sorry, but we will not stop." The council sent their most respected diplomats to intercede for the research station. A Varaxian elder named Kelmson personally traveled to meet with Commander Rodriguez. The Varaxian species were known as the galaxy's philosophers and peacekeepers. They had mediated countless conflicts. They had helped establish the council itself. Kelmson was over 2,000 years old and had resolved disputes between hundreds of species. Kelmson boarded Commander Rodriguez's ship. They spoke for 6 hours. The conversation was recorded, though the humans kept it classified for many years. In that conversation, Kelmson used every argument for mercy he had learned over 2,000 years of peace work. He appealed to human compassion. He reminded them of their own history and their efforts to move beyond cycles of violence. He spoke of the children on the research station who had done nothing wrong. Commander Rodriguez listened to everything. Then he asked Kelmson a simple question. If the Cathrel survive and attack humans again in 50 years or 100 years, will you take responsibility for the humans who die? Will you tell their families that Cathrel lives were more important than preventing future attacks? Will you accept the burden of that decision? Kelmson was silent for a long time. Finally, he admitted he could not. He could not promise the Cathrel would never be a threat again. He could not guarantee they would change. He could not take responsibility for potential future deaths. He could only hope that the Cathrel might learn and evolve into a better species given the chance. Commander Rodriguez said that hope was not enough. Not when the cost of being wrong was measured in billions of lives. He said humanity had hoped the Cathrel would stop after the first raid. They had hoped the council would protect them. They had hoped that diplomacy would work. That hope had killed 3 billion people. Kelmson left the ship in tears. It was the first time in his very long life that he had completely failed to find a peaceful solution. He reported back to the council that humanity would not be swayed. The Cathrel were going to die, all of them, and nothing anyone said would change that outcome. The council debated one final time. Some species proposed using force to stop humanity. They suggested that the combined fleets of the council could defeat the human forces and save the remaining Cathrel. But most species refused. They had seen what human weapons could do. They had watched humanity transform their entire civilization into a war machine in just 47 days. They wondered what else humans had built that they had not yet shown. No one wanted to fight a war against humans who were this committed, this organized, and this unrestrained by normal morality. More importantly, many species privately agreed with humanity's logic, even if they would not say so publicly. The Cathrel had proven they could not be trusted. The Council had proven it could not act quickly enough to prevent atrocities. If another aggressive species emerged in the future, those species wanted humanity to be around as a deterrent. They wanted potential enemies to know that if you attacked civilians, humanity would not show mercy. So the Council did nothing. They passed resolutions condemning human actions. They held ceremonies honoring the Cathrel as victims. They declared the human campaign to be a tragedy that must never be repeated. But they did not send their fleets to stop it. The research station's 3,000 Cathrel were allowed to send final messages. Many sent recordings to family who had already died. Some sent messages to the Council, begging them to remember that Cathrel had dreams and hopes too. Some sent messages to humanity itself, forgiving them or cursing them or simply trying to make the humans understand what they were destroying. Then the station was destroyed. Commander Rodriguez made sure it was quick. One moment the station existed. The next moment it was debris. 3,000 more Cathrel were gone. Across the galaxy, humans organized what they called the Remembrance Corps. These were people who documented every single Cathrel death. They recorded the names when known. They documented the locations. They preserved Cathrel messages and recordings. They cataloged Cathrel culture, art, science, and history. The humans were destroying the Cathrel, but they were also making sure the Cathrel W. Kriath sat in the archive chamber, surrounded by holographic displays showing the final days of the Cathrel extinction. His 4 eyes burned from hours of reading, but he could not look away. He had reached the last files, the ones that showed how humanity's campaign ended and what came after. The final Cathrel died 9 months after humanity had emerged from their silence. It was a single scout ship with a crew of 12, fleeing toward the galactic rim where they hoped to hide forever. Human sensors detected them. Human ships intercepted them. The Cathrel crew knew they were the last of their kind. They knew no one was coming to save them. They sent a final transmission to humanity and to the galaxy. The message was simple and haunting. We didn't know. We didn't understand what you were. We thought you were prey. We were wrong. Please remember that we existed. Please remember we were more than our mistakes. Then their ship was destroyed. The Cathrel were extinct. An entire intelligent species had been erased from the universe. It had taken humanity less than a year from their first military action to the complete extinction of their enemy. The speed and totality of it shocked the galaxy more than anything else. When humans committed to something, they did not stop halfway. The aftermath was complex and painful for everyone involved. Humanity had done what they said they would do. The Cathrel were gone. No Cathrel would ever raid human colonies again. No Cathrel would ever glass another human world. The threat had been permanently eliminated. But the cost of that elimination weighed heavily on humanity's soul. Admiral Sarah Chen was the one who confirmed the last Cathrel death. She stood on the bridge of her flagship and made the announcement to the human fleet. She said, "The Cathrel are extinct. We have ensured they will never threaten humanity again. We have avenged New Ethiopia and every human who died at Cathrel hands. Now we must live with what we have become." The human fleets began returning home. On every ship there were celebrations mixed with silence. Some humans felt justice had been served. Others felt sick about what they had done. Most felt both emotions at once. They had protected their species. They had also committed genocide. These two truths would live together in the human consciousness forever. Humanity formally requested to rejoin the Council of Sentient Worlds. The request came with a complete documentation of everything they had done. They provided exact numbers of Cathrel killed. They shared recordings of the extinction operations. They did not hide anything or make excuses. They simply presented the facts and said they would accept whatever judgment the Council decided. The Council debated for months about whether to readmit humanity. Some species wanted humans expelled forever. They said that a species capable of total genocide could not be trusted. They said humanity had proven they would ignore Council authority when it suited them. They said the peace of the galaxy required that humanity be isolated. Other species argued that humanity had only acted after the Council failed to protect them. They pointed out that humans had tried diplomacy first. They had followed Council rules for over a year while their colonies were raided. They had trusted Council justice until 3 billion of their people died. They said humanity's response, while extreme, was understandable given the circumstances. In the end, the Council voted to readmit humanity. But the terms were different than before. A new set of protocols was established that every species called the human protocols, though humans themselves called them the price of our actions. The protocol stated that no species would be allowed to threaten human civilians under any circumstances. Any attack on human civilian populations would be treated as an existential threat, and humanity would be permitted to respond with full military force. The Council would not interfere with human defensive actions. In exchange, humanity agreed to consult with the Council before any major military operation and to accept Council observers monitoring human military capabilities. But everyone understood the real meaning of the protocols. The galaxy now knew what happened if you pushed humanity too far. The peaceful mediators, the species that made friends easily and solved problems with patience, had shown they were also capable of absolute destruction. Every species in the galaxy would think very carefully before threatening humans. Humanity accepted one more burden voluntarily. They declared 3 former Cathrel worlds to be memorial worlds. These planets had been sterilized during the war, but now humanity invested enormous resources to preserve them. They built monuments listing every Cathrel who had died. They established museums displaying Cathrel art, culture, science, and history. They made sure that anyone in the galaxy could visit and learn about the species that humans had destroyed. The memorial worlds served multiple purposes. They were a warning to others about what humanity could do. They were a reminder to humans about what they had done. They were an attempt to preserve some memory of the Cathrel beyond their crimes. And they were a place where humans came to mourn, not just for the Cathrel but for their own lost innocence. Krieth read about how human culture had changed after the extinction. In human schools, every child now learned about the Devourers, as the Cathrel were officially called. But they did not learn a simple story of good humans defeating evil aliens. Instead, they learned a complicated truth about the cost of survival and the weight of terrible choices. Human children learned that the Cathrel had attacked first. They learned about the raids, the atrocities, and the 3 billion deaths on New Ethiopia. But they also learned that many Cathrel had opposed their government's aggression. They learned about the children and innocents who died. They learned that genocide, even in response to genocide, left scars on the species that committed it. The lesson humans taught their children was this: we did what we believed was necessary to protect our species.
We do not apologize for surviving.
But we must never forget what we became when we were pushed beyond our limits. We must never forget that our capacity for compassion has a dark mirror. We must never forget the Cathrel, both as a warning to others and as a reminder to ourselves. 200 years had passed since the extinction. Krieth closed the final files and sat in silence, processing everything he had learned. Humanity was now one of the most respected and feared species in the galaxy. When conflicts arose between species, both sides often requested human mediators because they knew humans understood the cost of war better than anyone. When aggressive species threatened others, the presence of human ships in the area usually ended the threat immediately. Humanity had become the galaxy's reluctant enforcer. They did not seek this role. They did not want it. But every species knew that if you attacked civilians, if you committed atrocities, if you pushed too far, humanity would respond with absolute force. The memory of the Cathrel kept the peace more effectively than any number of council resolutions. But Krieth also read about the burden this placed on human society. Humans suffered from what they called species guilt. They had saved themselves by destroying another species completely. That decision haunted them. Every human knew their safety was purchased with Cathrel extinction. Every human lived with the knowledge that their species was capable of eliminating another intelligent species from existence. Krieth decided he needed to visit one of the memorial worlds himself. He needed to see what humanity had built to remember the species they destroyed. He needed to understand this chapter of galactic history fully. He traveled to the world that had once been called Shard, where 500 million Cathrel had died in the first extinction operation. The memorial world was carefully maintained. Human volunteers worked there permanently, preserving Cathrel cultural exhibits and greeting visitors. Kriath walked through museums displaying Cathrel art. He saw their sculptures, their music, their literature. He learned about their history before they became conquerors. He saw recordings of Cathrel families, Cathrel children playing, Cathrel scientists making discoveries. The exhibits did not hide Cathrel crimes. There were sections documenting their attacks on human colonies, their use of banned weapons, their brutality. But there were also sections showing Cathrel who had opposed the violence, Cathrel who had tried to stop their government, Cathrel who had been victims of their own species' aggression. At the center of the memorial was a massive wall listing names. Every Cathrel who had died was recorded there. Billions of names. When possible, the names included the individual's age, occupation, and home. Cathrel children were marked with a special symbol. Cathrel who had opposed their government's policies were marked with another symbol. The wall made clear that this was not a simple story of evil creatures being destroyed. It was a tragedy of complex people making terrible choices and facing total consequences. Kriath noticed an elderly human man standing before the wall, his hand touching one of the names. The young scholar approached Karefi,